Hey there, welcome to School of Emo, the podcast where we dive into the world of emo, pop punk, and everything in between. If you've ever found yourself in your car screaming the lyrics to Taking Back Sunday, wearing way too much eyeliner in the early 2000s, adding a buckle or a chain to every outfit you've put on, you are in the right place. I'm Erin Judge, and each week I will be your fellow student, guiding you through the music, the culture, and the history that shaped an entire generation of angsty teens. I am not the teacher of this school. I am a fellow student, here to learn alongside you and from you. Together, we will cover a lot of information that doesn't really matter, but will remind us of the days of stalking MySpace channels and getting lost in chat rooms. So connect your dial-up, turn on your webcam, and let's go to School of Emo. Welcome back to School of Emo. Today I'm so excited because we are going to cover a topic that I feel like one is overdue on the podcast already, even though we are new, but it's also overdue in the larger scheme, the larger conversations of emo, the scene, pop punk, all of the above. And that is the women of emo. I saw a post or a campaign, I guess, a few months ago that highlighted the women of metal. And they brought in a few different women, some of which we're going to talk about today, and like really highlighted their stories of what it was like to be a woman, be a female in a male-dominated space of music, and how to navigate that and the misogyny that runs deep in the music industry, especially within these scenes, but also the power that women and female voices bring in this space. And it was really powerful and interesting, and was met with a lot of really positive reviews or positive, I guess, feedback from the community as a whole. And I was thinking about it because even on the cruise last year, the Emo's Not Dead cruise, apparently there was like a female voices or female something of emo at one of the late night socials. And I told you whenever I looked at I was doing like a prep for the cruise and I looked at the lineup and there was like a DJ social run guy. I don't exactly know who he was, but immediately looked at him and it was sort of the ick from his photo, and not for any particular reason beyond just it looked, he had the misogynistic look. It's hard to say, right? But the look wasn't quite right. But I heard, and I did not stay up late for his sets, I heard from those who went to that, like Women of Emo, female voices night, that they barely played any female songs. And so it was highly underrepresented. We saw that with when we were young, of how all the female artists were like booked at the same time. And there wasn't really a lot of strong representation of female artists in that space either. And so there is I think a lot of receptiveness right now to these conversations of women in these spaces and the role that they have played in opening the community up to new voices, new perspectives, and also creating a safer space for women and females in this space. And you can even count what the she's and the theys, right? Like all in this space. But there's also a strong need for this conversation because there are incredible female artists out there within bands, female only bands. There are also many women working behind the scenes. And there are a ton of women in this community, and there's not a lot of safety for women in this community fully. And so it's important to have these conversations to lift up those voices and also just make sure that we are, as you know, pop punk and emo is getting the resurgence it's getting, that we are keeping it a safe space for women as well, for all in the community, right? Which starts with some of our less represented communities of people. So that is what we're talking about today. And I'm really excited about it because women have always been a part of emo, always within the scene in many different ways, not just fans, not just in the crowd or running your favorite Tumblr page, but as vocalists, instrumentalists, trendsetters, truth tellers in a genre that hasn't always made space for them. So we're going to talk about front women, fighters fighting for a space for women, and the fans who shape the scene, as well as how their presence continues to challenge the male-dominated emo and pop punk legacy that we know of today. We're not going to get into quite as much of like the LGBTQ side of things. I think that there's a very close tie that we see within these spaces. I think that would be a better conversation later on. But know that these are two communities that are deeply intertwined within this scene, within culture as a whole, yes, but also deeply within this scene or these scenes. Because women are not, there's not so many that are so strictly emo, we are kind of widening the barriers a little bit, and looking at pop punk, emo, punk, post punk, metal, metalcore, all the different genres sort of within this bigger bubble of the scene that we have. So know that it's not going to be perfectly just one specific genre of music. But I think a lot of these voices, you will agree, still shape the scene and the people of the scene and can be highly respected at the very least, loved at the most. So before we get into the women that are part of the scene, emo, pop punk, the genre, the music we love, we have to talk about why there are so few that are here. And for most of us, this isn't going to be a surprise, but it is important to discuss. So emo, like punk and hardcore before it, has historically been more male dominated. So both in who gets the mic, but also who can get the press and get the attention. So some of the reasons: cultural norms is a big one. And that's in punk and alternative music, that had historically celebrated male angst, aggression, and vulnerability in ways that didn't always leave space for women to express rage or pain on their own terms. This is not just isolated in music. This is also very true culturally. We see this politically. We see this throughout culture in the United States and beyond, and over a lot of time, but also today. Women are historically thought of as being, softer and being more vulnerable, being more caretakers, but the kind of darker side of that vulnerability, the anger driven side of that, again, that rage underneath, hasn't always been accepted by women. I think women have been told that they are too emotional or whatever it may be, and an angry woman is like highly ridiculed, versus for men, that's thought to be more accepted as like a natural response to emotions and difficulty and all of those things. And it's not to say that men should not have those spaces, and they should not have the ability to kind of own those emotions or whatever it may be. Like, that is not true. But I think there is space for everyone. And I think women can also bring a bit of angst and rage and expression in a similar way, and also bring their own level of vulnerability that can still fit within the scene, even if it does look a bit different than what typically kind of these male voices have. And I'm talking very generally when I say male and female. Obviously, we know that people don't fit into these perfect boxes all the time. There's a lot that goes into how you present yourself, how you express your emotions, your feelings, how you process experiences that you've had. So just giving that disclaimer that I may give multiple times, because I do want to be respectful towards that and understanding of that. I think we are, but I know that on the internet, things can sometimes get a little black and white when they're not meant to be. So that's a big one. Another reason why there are fewer women in this space is that there are industry barriers that have made it harder for all female bands to break through, especially in genres that weren't considered kind of mainstream to begin with, that weren't necessarily pop. There's not a lot of space for women. We see this in other parts of the music industry as well, that women and men are treated much differently within spaces of like music. We also see it on with actors on screen. Women are expected not to age. They're expected to look a certain way, to behave a certain way. There are these different standards that are put on women that are deeply rooted, again, in these kind of societal stuff that we have lived with for many, 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 many years. But that crosses over into this space where a scene that is a little bit more kind of dirty and raw and edgy and not as clean cut, like there's just not a lot of space that has been made for women and female voices. And then, of course, misogyny was and still is baked into the scene. So from sexist lyrics to unsafe venues to gatekeeping fan communities, women have had to fight for legitimacy in this space and safety within this space. We're going to talk about Hayley Williams, of course, but I was reading a story that she shared, I think it was from an interview, but where she was talking about like the earlier days of Warped Tour, I believe, and how like proud and excited she was to perform. But while she was there, like the sexist remarks that the crowd gave to her, I think they like threw, it was like they were asking her to take her bra off or threw like tampons at her or something like that. Like just crazy reactions that the male bands were just not getting at that time. And there was less of a openness to just let the music be, let the lyrics be, let the performance be, and more of a focus on the gender and how she looked and how she presented and kind of the sexualization of her versus the music itself and like connecting to that. I think that has improved in some ways, but it has improved for the people that are the biggest and have had to fight tooth and nail through those types of experiences in order to get there. And so that hasn't necessarily gotten that much better, and is a real problem. I even noticed that on the cruise, like there is an over sexualization, especially of women in this scene. And again, we could talk about that fully in a different episode. And I don't want to sound like I'm just kind of stuck up or too uptight about things, but I think living as a woman in this world now for 32 years, I've seen how misogyny and lack of safety is built into this kind of sexualized humor and just these spaces that it doesn't seem like a big deal on the surface, but deep down it actually is. I saw that rampant on the cruise, of people who are primarily even older, and have lived through this. So it is very interesting to see this hasn't necessarily improved. And while these reasons are still true today, and the scene has not necessarily been open to women fully beyond that sexualization and that kind of fan behavior that male dominated spaces may enjoy, right? The women in the scene still showed up. They still pushed forward. They still fought for their space, and they still have made a tremendous impact on the scene and given us the music that we all deeply love and still inspires musicians today. So who are the women of punk who paved the way? So before we get into Hayley Williams and what follows in this post-punk scene, we have to think about women in punk and how they were already kicking down doors and rewriting what it meant to be loud, angry, and feminine on their own terms. So these pioneers didn't just influence emo's sound, they challenged the very power structures that emo would later inherit and struggle with. That is the basis of what punk actually is. And it was even more, I guess, hardcore, if you want, more punk for women to be taking up this space, especially, pre 90s, like 80s, 70s, 60s, early on. These women were so bold and courageous in these spaces and truly paved the way for what we see even today. So they deserve some acknowledgement, respect, and hopefully a lot more peace in their expression today as much as possible. So we have Susie Sue of Susie and the Banshees. So the godmother of goth and post-punk, Susie Sue's haunting vocals and bold aesthetic paved the way for emotional expression, theatrical fashion, and lyrical depth. She was an emo, but her influence on the emo space is undeniable. We also have Kathleen Hanna from Bikini Kill. Kathleen wasn't just in a band, she started a movement within this space. She was the founder of the Riot Girl movement in the early 90s and used punk music as a platform to talk about sexism, sexual assault, and female rage. Zines, underground shows, DIY feminism, everything that emo borrowed, Riot Girls did first. And she was a huge part of that. Girls to the Front wasn't just a rally cry. It was a safety measure in male-dominated spaces, and it shaped how many women later experienced emo shows and communities. A fierce pioneer in feminist punk, Kathleen described the vital work of creating safer, more inclusive spaces for women in many different interviews. So one interview, she was quoted as, "Girls in the Riot Girl meetings, it was the first time they'd been an all-female atmosphere. That feeling of a room changing. I've always wanted to start a band that really changes the room into this beautiful space of possibilities. In another interview, she said, "We prioritized having girls and women come to the front. A lot of the shows we were playing, it was straight cisgender white guys predominating. So I started inviting girls to the front. Hey, do you girls want to come to the front?" And then it kind of became a thing. And then on another interview where they were asking her about the hostility that she faced in the scene, she said, "When people bring sexism to the fore, it's like popping a blackhead. There's sexism in the punk scene. We can't ignore this issue anymore." An icon, a legend in our space. Another woman of punk is Brody Dahl or Dow from the Distillers. With snarling vocals and aggressive stage presence, Brody helped prove that women could dominate punk's raw, messy energy. Her lyrics often tackled pain, identity, and survival, emo themes through and through. Like the energy and the power. There is something even more powerful about bringing that angst and anger and punk energy to a stage that's not just sexual as a woman. That's not always seen. And it's totally fine taking the more sexual angle if you want. Like there's power in that too and owning that. But in this time, taking a different approach and really leaning into what the men were doing in this space was a huge deal. So props to Brody. And then our last kind of trailblazer in the punk era was Polly Styrene from X-Ray Specs. A trailblazer in every sense, Polly was a biracial woman in the 1970s punk movement who sang about consumerism, patriarchy, and mental health. Her courage made it more possible for future generations to be weird, outspoken, and unapologetically themselves in alternative music. So she crossed multiple realms of marginalized communities, which, again, putting ourselves back into like the 70s and the 80s, very different world. Like we still see a lot of issues with racism, sexism, all those things today, even stronger then, and especially strong within the music industry. So Polly, flowers and props to you. So why does this matter when it comes to the emo space and what followed in the 90s and 2000s? Women like Kathleen Hanna and Brody Dahl created the emotional permission structure that emo borrowed. Riot Girl zines became early scene blogs. Punk's DIY ethos became emo's burn CDs and basement shows. And punk women who screamed in the face of misogyny made it just a little more possible for emo girls to take the mic, even if the odds were still stacked against them. So before Haley hit the Warped Tour stage or MySpace gave us our first band crush, it was these women, often overlooked in history, who made noise first. And they are very important, just like punk is important to then lead into emo, right? These women are extremely important for what followed for the entire scene, not just the women in the scene. So now let's get into some of the iconic front women, female voices of emo and pop punk. And we are starting with none other than Hayley Williams of Paramore, who many will proclaim as the queen of emo. I will never forget the moment that I saw Hayley Williams in like real life. I live in Nashville. She lives in Nashville, but I was at this little like brunch cafe on like a Wednesday or Thursday with a friend and was sitting in the back of the restaurant, but facing the entrance. And in walks Hayley with someone else, probably writing music nearby. It's an area where there's a lot of like songwriter spaces. But she comes in to order coffee. And so she's standing there waiting. And I am literally across the entire restaurant from her, but staring at her. And all I wanted was to jump out of my chair, sprint towards her, and give her a huge hug. I did not. I was respectful. She seemed very much in her own space, like was with her friend on her phone, like doing things she needed to do. Seemed very kind, like she was just living her life, but definitely didn't seem like she wanted to be interrupted or wanted the attention. But no one else in the restaurant was freaking out, apparently. But I was inside just like panicking at how incredible it was to see this person that I respect and look up to so much, and love so much. So Haley is incredible. But the Haley we know today started somewhere, right? And we can't dismiss her early years and what that meant for emo. So at just 16, she fronted Paramore, a band that broke into the male dominated Warped Tour lineup with hooks, depth, and charisma that couldn't be ignored. Songs like Misery Business and Decode became anthems, not just for emo kids, but for anyone feeling like they didn't fit into the version of femininity that culture was selling. Haley didn't just perform, she led. She had confidence, she had power on a stage. What's really interesting about Paramore is that they're one of the more, I guess you could consider mainstream, successful acts. They crossed into the space of pop as well, but were at the core still very emo pop punk, like what the scene was in the early 2000s. And she was a huge part of that. They then went on to break up. Like, obviously there was some drama with her and a boyfriend, and then he left. Fun fact, I used to go to church with that ex-boyfriend. um, and didn't know him very well, but very interesting. Definitely glared a lot, but he left the band, and then Paramore came back and actually reformed and came back together. She did a few things on her own, but they took a bit of a hiatus. But there's no voice like Haley Williams, and so I know she's been involved in many spaces, songwriting, all of that. Besties with Taylor Swift as well, like, very involved in the music scene as a whole, but has continued to evolve. And so now it's probably more considered pop, more mainstream, but no one beats Haley Williams on a stage vocally, but also just the entire stage presence that she owns, the energy and the confidence that she exudes, which was built on these early stages of Warped Tour as a teenage girl in a very misogynistic, over sexualized environment. Now, unfortunately, Haley, I guess, and Paramore as a whole, were part of a bit of the misogyny when it came to problematic lyrics and themes within this time and era of kind of emo pop punk. And so she recently, I guess in 2020, addressed the problematic lyrics in Misery Business, and they actually retired it from Paramore's setlist for years, just to make sure that they were not contributing to more of the problem. They did eventually change those lyrics, which some fans were not very happy about because it did change the song, but was necessary to reintroduce that song into our space and into live performances without those problematic lyrics at play, showing some self-awareness and growth within this space. She has been vocal about the misogyny that she's encountered on tour as well. Like I mentioned earlier in that interview, kind of recap that I'd read. But she was also quoted in another interview and said, "Oh my God, I hope no young female experiences the shit that I experienced. When we were teenagers, the way forward was to be tough all the time. Our entire scene was contributing to shitty treatment of women and anything that wasn't masculine. It was like if I didn't spit further, I felt like someone was going to throw me out." And then after reflecting on the nostalgia versus reality, she said, "It's revisionist history on a less heavy topic. People look back with these rose tinted glasses. They talk about the good and forget the rest." She also recently was heavily critical of what was happening within like the Christian space. So Paramore kind of oddly also overlapped. They were one of those bands that overlapped a bit with like the Christian space as well as the emo space, like kind of the Under Oath world, and not as heavily as Under Oath, but sort of confusingly. And there is a prominent male artist in the, like, Michael Tate is his name, but he's in the Christian space. He was part of a very big Christian band, and it recently came out that he had sexually like abused or had like very sexual misconduct with younger men over the many years, and kind of using his power, the same story we hear all the time, against men, not necessarily women, but still very problematic. And she spoke out against it and was communicating that people in the industry know this, especially in that industry. And it's not a surprise, and that basically it's a joke to let people off and not hold people accountable, because this is the type of activity, this is the type of behavior that runs rampant within the industry, and people just let it happen all the time without standing up. And then they act surprised whenever allegations come out, whenever they all knew that it was happening. Like, they're not dumb, right? Which is very interesting. So good for Haley. She has earned her space to sing and dance however she wants on a stage. And she is also, I think, deserves a lot of apology from the scene with how she was treated, and should not have had to persevere through certain things that she had to. She did, though, and we're all thankful for it. So we also have Lacey Sturm from Flyleaf, another kind of like in that emo Christian crossover. Lacey brought a screaming soul to emo metal. With haunting vocals and raw religious imagery, she stood out in the heavy scene. Flyleaf's kind of most iconic song, All Around Me, gave us vulnerability and distortion, and Lacey proved that women could scream, cry, and lead with power. As someone who I am a Christian, I was heavily involved in like a heavy like Christian community as a teen. And I was a little bit restricted, not fully, but what concerts I could go to, or like what music I could actually buy was a little bit restricted in what was available. And I remember the first time that I ever came across Flyleaf, and like I still have their CD today. It's like in the store. But I was obsessed right away, because Lacey offered something, again, so unique. And again, it was sort of that darkness, raw vulnerability. I think Paramore offered this kind of the teen angst vibe, right? Where it was a lot more like the boys singing about teenage heartbreak. But Lacey offered this kind of deeper vulnerability. I think like we saw within some of the early days of the Used, right? Some of these bands that were a little bit more like cutting you open with a knife, kind of vulnerable, and then with a bit of a harder edge, which is fascinating and not something at the time I had seen from many women. And it was really inspiring to me. I was obsessed, and still am, with Lacey. I wish she, like Flyleaf, had done a lot more in this space. I know she's, I think, performing at Warped Tour this year on her own, and has done some collaborations. I believe she had like vocal surgery, but hopefully we see even more from her. So after Lacey had some issues in Flyleaf, she was replaced by another incredible voice, Kristen May, who is also part of Videra. Kristen led the indie emo band Videra, whose 2009 album Stages was emotional, powerful, and overlooked. She later stepped into Flyleaf's frontwoman role after Lacey's departure, bringing her own artistry to a new chapter of the band. It's also an iconic voice. We also have Tay Jardine, who is from We Are the In Crowd. Tay's blend of pop punk melodies and emotional storytelling carried We Are the In Crowd through the early 2010s. Songs like Rumor Mill and Kiss Me Again played with emo tropes, breakups, confusion, identity, and a female voice that we rarely got in that era. So part of that kind of longer third wave or resurgence. I don't know what you would consider those 2010s. I would consider it still part of the third wave, but it is a little bit different. It's like third wave take two. We have Cassidy Pope of Hey Monday. Hey Monday were the pop punk band that the 2000s were missing, and Cassidy Pope's vocals only enhanced it. While the band only lasted for a couple of years, they have made some resurgence with like When We Were Young and festivals and things like that, but didn't necessarily last in the scene as long. Pope made a lasting impression on the scene with her ability to capture the essence of youth and joy alongside the difficulties of accepting adulthood. So again, brought another voice into this space, especially within more of that pop punk crossover. We also have Lizzie Hale of Hailstorm. So as the lead vocalist of Hailstorm, Lizzie Hale has a vocal intensity that allows for a range of genres such as metal, alternative rock, and grunge. She was one of the ones that was highlighted within that Women of Metal series that I mentioned. And it's probably more in the metal space, but still impacting what's happening within the emo, pop punk, post-punk scene as well. Her voice is so incredible that she's been able to collaborate with other artists such as Machine Gun Kelly and Shinedown. After 23 years of providing her talents to Hailstorm, Hale has no intention of slowing down. Out of everyone on this list, she's been around the longest, influencing an array of musicians, both musically and personally, by utilizing her talents as a vocalist, lyricist, and guitarist. She's not going anywhere. Another that we cannot ignore if we're thinking about the queen of pop punk is Avril Lavigne. Didn't start with her for a reason. I think we could debate the emo piece here, but pop punk for sure. No one else, I think, defined pop punk for women who wanted to break out of the norm and break into this industry. We had Paramore, doing their thing. Avril Lavigne even brought a more unique spin on this. And as a solo artist, just brought a very unique person for younger women, younger girls to look up to as a possibility of their role and like their place in the scene as a whole. So not only did she come with a bounty of talent, Avril had statements to make and critiques to deliver in the form of musical expression. Throughout her entire discography, she's openly commented on the mistreatment of women in the music industry versus that of men. She was one of the first women to make a name for herself in alternative rock in the 2000s and blew the door off its hinges for the future generation of women in rock. Now, not all of her music is non-problematic when it comes to misogyny, but especially those early days, I think being able to kind of like fit in with the guys and find your space there and still be vulnerable and deal with the heartbreak, but also be one of the guys in a way, like not perfect. We might consider that different today, but it was necessary, I think, to start new conversations and at least something different to see in the space at the time. Putting ourselves back into the late 90s, early 2000s, this was fresh and new and really opened the doors for a lot of women. Even just the idea that like we can skateboard too, and like we can wear the baggy jeans and baggy clothes too, and that's okay. And and still be vulnerable and emotional and soft, like with how we feel and honest with how we feel. Like we can have both and do both, and that's okay. She really opened the space for that. And then we also have Jenna McDougall of Tonight Alive. So Jenna delivered the emotional intensity that was needed for the emo lyricism of songs from Tonight Alive, such as Wasting Away. While their growth into alternative stardom was slow, it was steady, and they soon found their footing. Tonight Alive rose to the top. McDougall's vocals have been a staple in the band since their inception in 2008, when she was only 16 years old. To this day, she represents the capability for women to participate in an array of genres such as emo, pop punk, and alternative rock. She was also part of When We Were Young last year, 2024, and she actually performed Hold On Till May with Pierce the Veil on stage, which was a huge deal, and she did incredible, but a very iconic moment for her. So not only do we have these female front women in some of these voices in emo, we also have all female and female-led bands that help shape the scene in their own way. Rainer Maria was formed in the mid-90s and was part of emo's second wave, fronted by Kathleen Demaris. Their sound was poetic, moody, and often categorized alongside bands like Mineral or American Football, but with a female voice full of ache and edge. Tsunami Bomb, which was led by Agent M, Emily Whitehurst. They brought pop punk energy with fierce vocals and Riot Girl influence. Their 2002 album, The Ultimate Escape, captured both sarcasm and sincerity. Isley, fronted by sisters Sherry and Stacey Dupree. Isley leaned into whimsical indie emo vibes, less slam dancing, more dreamscape. Their ethereal harmonies and literary lyrics added a softer but still emotional texture to the genre. We have Cherry Bomb, a group of teenage girls who played their own instruments and wrote their own music. They were proof that young women could and should take up space in alt music. They later rebranded as Hey Violet and leaned more pop, but their roots are still very emo and they still had an impact. Meet Me at the Altar. So fast forward to now, this all-female band is making major waves. They've been signed to Fueled by Ramen and represent a new generation of scene revival, bringing diversity and energy back to a space that badly needed it. And we have Daisy Grenade making their space in the scene over the last year with opening When We Were Young, 2024, opening on tour with Pierce the Veil and Sleeping with Sirens in 2025. This alt pop duo led by Danny Nigro and Keaton Whitaker are TikTok stars that bring a unique female energy to the stage in this scene. They definitely represent more of that kind of Gen Z voice in this space and kind of cross into that pop punk space. So not all icons of emo, female leaders of emo, were found on the stage. There were also scene queens, the women who dominated MySpace, Pure Volume, and early Tumblr. And while these women may not have been singing or creating the music, writing the lyrics that we love, they were shaping the aesthetic and the mood of the era, shaping the scene and the kind of generation we had as a whole, right? The culture of the space. So we have Audrey Kitching, Hannah Beth, and Dakota Rose. These were early influencers before that was even a true word. The hair, makeup, photo editing styles defined scene culture in the early 2000s, from teased hair to side bangs to lip piercings. They built entire online brands while often being mocked or harassed by the same fanboys that were idolizing bands like MCR or A Day to Remember. So being real, being honest, these girls didn't just shape the scene, they were the scene, and as impactful as many of these artists for what we know of as emo in the third and the fourth wave. Not so much the first and second, but as it has grown, even with the revival we see today, a lot of it is rooted heavily in nostalgia, which again goes beyond just the music into these online spaces. I don't think we'll ever have that again. These women are still involved, maybe in some way, some of them are, and there's more to this list. If you have followed others, these are some of the big ones. But today it's just different. Then the influence of like Pinterest boards and again, all the way back to Tumblr, like going viral was very challenging to do, and to have such an impact on culture at that time online was a huge deal and kind of insane to consider. So it's impressive that these women were able to do that as teenage girls. And again, were they like completely unproblematic to the misogyny and the issues with how females were treated in the scene? Maybe not, but they still did have an impact and deserve some recognition for that. So we can't talk about women in emo without coming back to the misogyny that they faced and continue to face today. So something that we had mentioned before are the lyrics that objectify or villainize women. So we saw that with Paramore's Misery Business, that they changed, thankfully. But Once a Whore, You're Nothing More, it's been criticized for being slut-shaming and chauvinistic. Even the used Bury Myself Alive, the lyrics, My Foot on Your Neck, and I Finally Have You Right Where I Want You, has been cited as a direct threat towards a former partner, and showing like this kind of dominance and aggression physically against women. Fall Out Boy, Sugar, We're Going Down, I'm Just a Notch in Your Bedpost, but You're Just a Line in the Song. Again, kind of that slut shaming type of behavior towards women. And while all genres have this, right, and some genres are worse than others with how they talk about women and treat women within the genre, pop punk emo is no different. It's still problematic because, again, women and men are held to a different standard of what's acceptable, what's okay, and that limits self-expression. And the whole purpose of this emo space and scene is supposed to be a safe space for expression, for going against these things that are the norm, for creating a new path, like this alternative piece, right? It was really, really big. And for some reason, the kind of misogyny that runs deep in how women are treated isn't that different within the scene that should be against those like injustices in the real world outside of the scene, right? So it can be a bit contradictory. Band members and scene men have also been accused of grooming and abuse. So we have Jesse Lacey, which is a very common one, Johnny Craig of Dance Gavin Dance, Mike Fuentes of Pierce the Veil, multiple others. People are talking about all-time low currently, right? This is not new. This is rampant. This is problematic. And happens often. And there's probably a lot that we haven't heard about because women haven't been able to speak out or wanted that attention that is not necessarily good from speaking out, and it's not safe to speak out for many people. The seeing girl as a punchline. So women were reduced to groupies or fake fans while men were crowned future, while men were celebrated and crowned as like these tortured artists and poets. And they were celebrated, women were criticized, which isn't okay. In recent years, survivors have come forward. The scene has faced a reckoning, and many of us are re examining our nostalgia through a more critical lens. But here's the thing growth is happening, and that's a very good thing. Despite growth being slow, women have always been here. We were writing blogs, creating zines, booking shows, buying merch, forming the community, creating the music. Women have been here, and they will continue to hold a really important space and a voice within this scene, no matter where it may go. So we can say that the future of emo, pop punk, post punk is very much female and loud. The scene is evolving. There are more front women bands headlining tours, non-binary and trans artists reshaping the sound and the space, fans holding bands accountable, pushing for inclusive and safe spaces. So if emo is about emotion, truth, and honesty, then women have always been at the heart of it and will be the ones that truly carry the heart of that culture forward into whatever this next wave will be. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I have put together a little like women in emo playlist highlighting some of these bands. Some of these bands I have not listened to. So I hope that if you are newly recognizing some of these names and you are like me and have fallen into the space where you only have a few female voices on your go-to playlist as well, maybe check out that playlist. I'll put it in the show notes. We also, if you have a space open, so you can leave a review, you can comment. If you're watching on YouTube, you can email me if you want to come on the show to share throughout an episode. But I would love to hear any names that maybe I haven't hit and highlighted, any bands that you think deserve recognition in this space as well, so that we can keep lifting up those voices, those names, keep supporting these bands so that hopefully Warped Tour, when we were young, the emo crews, we have more representation of female artists as well. Again, not to diss male artists or say that they don't deserve those spaces, but as a whole, we want to see women also get some recognition and like have space created for them so that as a whole of the culture and the scene and the community, we all benefit from that level of, different expression, but also new perspectives and new sounds. We also want to make sure that we are challenging the way it's always been to make sure that spaces in our community are safe towards women and other marginalized communities, where the truth, the heart of the emo community can actually be upheld and be pure of what it is, which is connection and expression in a safe environment. That is what we all want at the core. And if you don't, then I would challenge, like, are you actually part of this space? Which is a deeper conversation that we may not be able to have. And I do not hold the responsibility to have for you. So that's something that you can have on your own. Next week, we will get back into some bands, show recaps, all that fun stuff. So tune back in. Can't wait to see you there in our next class. And can't wait, hopefully, to hear from you if you are enjoying the shows so far. If it's your first episode, go back and watch some of the others. Listen, I would love to know what you are enjoying as we continue to create this for and with you.